I'll invite the rest of our remaining speakers up on stage. So this is a chance for us, for you, to ask that question that you've been aching to ask all day, but never had the opportunity to. Unfortunately, Amy's had to leave a little early, so it's an all-male cast, I'm afraid. But nonetheless, I'm sure we'll get some sense out of them, despite that. We're going to get. I think what we'll do is we'll start off with maybe a little question that I'll throw out to all of you, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Just a reminder that when we do take questions from the audience, if you stick your hand up, and do wait until the microphone comes to you before you start talking. That way everyone can hear. And please do stand up when you give your question, okay? Right. Okay, gentlemen. So, I just wondered if we could maybe start off with simply talking about kind of our conference theme. How do we introduce Jesus to a skeptical world? You were doing the last seminar actually on online apologetics, weren't you, Kurt, down in the Smeaton Vaults?
Yes.
I guess that's kind of a lot of the place where a lot of people are doing these kinds of debates these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quickly becoming the go-to forum for how to engage with people in apologetics. And there's massive target audience of people that you can be engaging with and giving new information. The rate at which the information travels is just really crazy compared to 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Real Clear Apologetics is a website where you're trying to kind of elevate the conversation a bit, because I don't know if anyone else has been on Facebook recently on any debate pages, but it gets pretty nasty pretty quickly sometimes. So what's your way of hoping to kind of start to do something about that?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of Real Clear Apologetics is that not only is it a social networking site like Facebook, but everybody gets their own blog. And I think blogging, which for those who don't know stands for weblog, just blog for short, I think is a good way to raise the level of conversation to be a little bit more civil and thought-provoking, and even for ourselves, I think we can understand other people's views more seriously when we engage in that style, because we have more time to sit and think through their argument and more time to research ourselves as opposed to just a quick 5-minute argument.
Do you ever get time to do any interacting on Facebook, Peter S. Williams, or is it something you steer clear of?
I'm not on Facebook, but I have recently joined Twitter, so I'm edging into this area, and I'm just with a friend trying to get a website up and going with a YouTube channel. Even if you just set up a YouTube channel, and you can create these little playlists of things, so you can kind of archive what you think are actually good material under different sort of topic headings and things, and then say tweet out those playlists to your social group. So here's a playlist on arguments for the resurrection of Jesus, or archaeology in the Bible, or whatever. I think this is an area where we should sort of let a thousand flowers bloom, as it were, and just use every means at our disposal. Whatever you're tied into, use that for the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, same question to you as well, Fuzz. How do we show Jesus to a skeptical world today? People, I think, have more questions than ever about Jesus, because it's very easy to go online and come up with all kinds of objections these days to
Well, the strategy of our ministry is not to introduce Jesus right away, but rather to use science as a platform to begin the conversation that hopefully will lead to a discussion of spiritually oriented material and matters that then can serve as a segue to introducing people to the very good historical and philosophical reasons to embrace the Christian faith and to embrace the person of Jesus. So our strategy is, we live in a world that's dominated by science and technology, and many people think science has made Christianity irrelevant. And so our response is to first of all show that that's not a valid intellectual objection to considering the Christian faith, but hopefully even using science as a segue to ultimately the gospel.
Right. Trevor, as someone with a background in medicine, and you were a local GP for a long time, did kind of issues of faith ever come into conversations you were having with any people? Was it sort of an appropriate kind of venue obviously people, I'm sure, came to you with emotional issues as much as physical issues.
Absolutely, and I think particularly towards the end of my time in general practice, towards the end of 30 years, as people had obviously grown up with me, they became more and more open. And I got into trouble on the big questions a few months ago by saying that I didn't think actually a general practitioner was doing their job properly if they were not prepared to address the spiritual issues of life. Because actually, as the church is diminished, I think in a very real sense, although I don't like the term, the GP has become the secular priest. And over half the consultations that I had would be over issues that you could not sort out on a prescription pad and needed really spiritual answers.
Alistair, your last session was on this, essentially this area. How do we make a rational case for Christ in the world today? Do you think people are willing to listen to our reasons? I mean, obviously, we often quote that verse from 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the hope that's within you, and do it with gentleness and respect. I suppose the question is, are people asking? Do we need to be creating more opportunities for people to ask those sorts of questions?
Well, I think people do ask those questions. I think very often we don't give particularly good answers. I think what I find in my discussions with people is they get a bit fed up with general principles, abstract ideas. And when they talk about Jesus, immediately you're talking about history, you're talking about a person, and you're talking about relationships. And, all of these are very, very accessible ideas. So paradoxically, actually, it is perhaps easier to do apologetics through the person of Jesus. Because after all, Christianity does say quite a lot about Jesus, so it's quite a good starting point.
I had someone come up in the break, one of the breaks, and they were essentially just asking me that simple question. Look, I've got my friend or relative, I think it was, often when we get into these discussions, she says, oh, probably the church made it all up later on, all that stuff about Jesus and so on. And they were simply asking, what can I say to that? And I said, well, I hope you went to Amy or Ewing's session and buy a book, but there is stuff out there, good answers to those kinds of questions, but we do need to do a bit of digging, don't we, to actually...
Well, we do, but I think very often people say, well, of course, it's all made up, isn't it? Actually, that is their way of saying, tell me more about this. And, you mustn't assume it's a challenge. Very often it's an invitation. I think very often we need to say, well, I'm sorry you think that, but let me tell you what I think, and go in, and the message you're giving is, this guy changes everything, and I want you to find out about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for contributing today. Now, let's throw it open to our audience. We've got 2 roving mics going around, so please do stick your hand up. It doesn't have to be on what we've just been discussing. It may be a question that's been on your mind somewhere else in the conference. But do please stick your hand up if you've got a question, and we'll start to get a microphone over to you. Someone at the back, and if you've got another question, put your hand up and we'll get the other microphone to you so you can come in next. But,
hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your amazing conference. So I'm 16, I'm in year 11, and I'm like the only Christian in my class. There's quite a lack of belief in my year group, and people come to me with their questions. So do you have any tips on how I can share my faith and not become defensive when they ask me questions and it's like they're deliberately challenging me to try and catch me out? Do you have any tips
Okay.
on that?
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So in that kind of youth, I don't know who's the youngest among us. I don't know if that's... it might be you, Kurt.
Sure.
So do you want to start off?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So first of all, I would say continue learning more. I think the more you learn, the more I think it will be better for you to be, you'll be more well prepared to respond. Sometimes you don't have to bite the bullet and engage, especially if it's on Facebook or something like that. You can very easily, do a quick Google search or Wikipedia search for ways to respond to certain objections. You can learn more about it as you continue growing. And sometimes it can be very simple as, well, as a Christian, I think that, for example, if it was an objection to the resurrection, say, well, I think it's the best explanation of all the historical facts that we have. And then that might bring a follow-up question like, well, what do you mean historical facts? You can say, oh, Well, scholars generally agree that there is a number of facts, such as James' post-resurrection conversion, Paul's conversion, the fact that the disciples thought that they were having genuine experiences. These are all certain facts that form together for this cumulative case that the resurrection is the best explanation of these facts.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else want to volunteer an answer? Yeah, Alistair, go ahead.
I think one thing I'd say to you is very personal, and that is in several of his letters, C.S. Lewis talks about the sense of loneliness he experiences at being an apologist. In other words, he finds it quite draining. And I'm sure you find that as well. And I think what I'd say is, you really need to have a supportive group to help you, because otherwise you'll feel a bit lonely and discouraged. So I think, having friends at church who will support you in what you're doing is really very important in your case.
That's given me a really good reminder of something I said I'd do earlier, talking about support groups. If you are online, and I'm sure you are if you're a 16-year-old, there is a relatively new Facebook group called UK Apologetics. Some of the creators of it are here, actually, but it's a really good place to go if you just want some time to spend asking questions from friends who are on the same kind of journey that you are. It's what's called a closed group on Facebook, so you have to be sort of accepted to join the group, and it's not, the conversations aren't public in that sense. So it's a very good place for having those sort of private conversations with fellow apologists here in the UK who are passionate about it. I do encourage you to check that out, UK Apologetics on Facebook. Thank you very much for the question. Great question. Shall we have another one? I think we've got one here, and then why don't we get the microphone over to the next person? Could you stand up and thank you.
Hi, my question's primarily for Alistair, but it's also for everyone else. In my experience discussing with non-believers, both online and in real life, well, online is in real life, but...
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Generally, they don't seem to respect Dawkins and co. really anymore. They seem to have slightly turned against them and bringing them down. And in my experience, and it seems to me at least, that the kind of new atheist wave is like starting to pass. And I was wondering what you guys think might come next.
Okay, Alistair first, and then we'll come to.
Well, I think it is passing. Its chief virtue, if it was a virtue, was its novelty value. And the problem is, you keep saying these things, after a while they just aren't new anymore, and what seemed to be simple turns out to be simplistic. And what you do is you watch the media, and it's absolutely clear Dawkins has morphed from a figure of cultural respect to, in effect, one article, I think it was in The Spectator recently, said he'd become like Mary Whitehouse, if that means anything to you. In effect, a sort of figure of fun. And I think that's very significant. No one is lining up to be the new Richard Dawkins. That's very significant, I think. That does not mean that the questions have gone away. But it does mean, I think, that we have a very good position of being able to engage questions in a much more realistic way, and also are able to, in effect, say, well, of course, there's a new atheism. They gave these utterly simplistic answers. Let's now look at these in more detail. And what I think is good about the new atheism is that at least we have now learnt that slick and simplistic is not equivalent to credible. Very often there's just, really giving unthought through answers. And so the fact that we very often offer rather more complicated answers is no longer seen as a negative. So I think we're in quite a good position, but my question would be, well, what on earth is going to come next? And I just don't know, but whatever it is, we need to be doing some planning right now.
Does anyone else want to come in on that, Peter Williams? This is obviously close to
some
your
commentators have seen a sort of wave of what's even been called the new atheists. Writers like Alain de Botton and so on, who have been atheist writers, saying that actually as atheists we should learn something from the kind of social practices of religion. And
interestingly, the latest thing is the Atheist Church, isn't it? So it's
that kind of thing,
a sort of gathering, very like a church service, but God's not there, basically.
That's right. But this is at least a recognition from an atheist side that there are some good things about religion and about spirituality and so on, that they can actually see Christianity as something that they can learn from, whilst still rejecting what they would see as all the sort of metaphysical baggage, all the theological truth claims they want to reject, but they do see something valuable to interact with.
Is this the pendulum swinging back slightly then, after Dawkins telling us that, and Hitchens, that religion poisons everything?
Religion poisons everything.
That maybe was a bit of an overstatement, people are realising.
That's right. So there's a bit of a backlash there. So that's a sort of interesting recent development.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for that question. I think our next one, have we already got someone at the mic? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for this conference. I listened to you on Premier Radio. My question is this: how would you explain God's stance on homosexuality to a young Christian or a young person who thinks they have homosexual tendency?
Okay, that's a tough one. Okay. Trevor, shall I pass this one to you? This hot potato to you?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I think this is one of the crucial questions for the church today, but I think that it's locked in with an even broader question, which relates to the earlier one when you were asking about what else is coming. And I think that there is no doubt that if you don't worship the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, you won't worship nothing, you will worship anything. And one of the popular false gods is the worship of sex. So whether you're homosexual, bisexual, whether you're heterosexual, transgender, or whatever, everyone uniformly living in Western society faces exactly the same temptation to engage in sexual activity whenever and however they happen to feel that they want to at any particular time. So I think that actually it is a mistake, a category mistake in our society to think that necessarily the homosexual person or the young person grappling with homosexual feelings is necessarily facing a different battle in terms of sexual activity is okay or not for them as a Christian. The second point that I would make is that it's a very difficult area to talk about now because it's become such a sensitive political football that even sharing facts about the issue, you can be immediately branded as a homophobic bigot. It is the easiest thing in the world to say that. But certainly looking objectively at the scientific studies about the development of human sexuality, when you are about 14 or 15, some studies in the States have shown that sexual ambivalence, having bisexual feelings and not being sure where your sexual feelings are oriented towards in terms of gender, is relatively common, some up to 25%. But by the time you reach your 20s, for the vast majority of those who will have had those ambivalent feelings in younger years, they will, not in every case, but the majority of those will be fixed in a heterosexual direction. So I think particularly for young people, one of the most important things to communicate is that the feelings that you have now will not necessarily persist into later life. And indeed, there are stories of, in the paper from time to time, of gay men who suddenly find that they're not gay anymore. So I think that whatever our sexual state, there is always hope that God will give us grace to be able to live with it and to live a life of fulfillment, actually, whether we engage in sexual activity or not ever in our lives.
Thank you. Let's go to another question. And do we have a microphone already with anyone? Perhaps you'd like to pass it to someone here. We will come to some at the back as well. If you've got any questions, we'll make sure. Let's take the next one from the row who are in the back. But yes, go ahead.
I've got a question about the media and where apologetics should stand in relation to that, because it seems that so much of the media machine, if you want to call it that, is rather atheistic. So, for example, we've got Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss coming out with this big new movie called The Unbelievers, where they've got A-list celebrities and comedians on their side. Or there are some programs which might be more mainstream science programs on television, but they keep sneaking in little atheistic or naturalistic assumptions. So given that so much of the media seems to be against us in quite a number of times, how should we respond to that? Should we be trying to get A-list celebrities on our side and make our own movies? Or you know, are we meant to copy that, do something subversive? How should we respond to that?
Let's start with Fuzz, and then we'll see who else wants to pick this up.
Well, you know, I think the problem actually goes even further than that, because when you do actually see, at least this is true in the States, when you do actually see the media attempting to bring some balance to that by having a Christian perspective alongside an atheistic perspective, oftentimes the representatives that they choose for the Christian faith are probably the worst examples that you could find. You know, and it's done because they want to create sensationalism, and so I honestly don't know how to combat that. To be frank, that's something that our organization really struggles with, particularly when it comes to science faith issues, because you know, there's always representatives from organizations who have museums where there's saddles on the back of dinosaurs that are chosen, and when you have people of faith who are scientists who have very reasonable and rigorous positions that would be respected, you know, very seldom are they ever going to be selected to be representatives. And I don't know how to really combat that other than to just put all of our collective noses to the grindstone and do everything we can to always, you know, do things with rigor and in a way that garners respect, you know, but at the same time being true to our principles as Christians. You know, one of the things that we find in our organization that goes a long way, and that is to keep in mind 1 Peter 3:15, but not the portion that says always be prepared to give reasons for the hope that you have, which is the mantra of everybody who's interested in apologetics. But there's more to that verse, and that is to do it with gentleness and respect and a clear conscience. And the more that we as Christians employ the second part of that verse, the more respect and effective we're going to be at getting our message across. And so I think it's just a matter of putting our noses to the grindstone. I don't know how else to really combat that, because I think the last thing we want to do is sink to that level, because that doesn't do anything to bring honor to Christ's name, in my opinion. Much of an answer, I'm sorry. But
no, it's an honest answer. Thank you. I mean, the person that the question made me think of in his day was C.S. Lewis, in a way, who obviously the BBC, you know, put on primetime slots during the war years to tell people about the reasons for belief in God. It's almost unimaginable to think of that now. But Alistair, you still are obviously invited onto programs and things like that. What should we be doing today, I wonder, to do what Lewis was doing back then in a contemporary context? Do you have any kind of suggestions?
Well, I think I very much echo what's just been said. You know, you've got to be winsome, you've got to be engaging, you don't get defensive, you don't get aggressive. You just say, well, that's a great question. Here's a great answer. You know, you've really got to be able to, you know, show that there are things we can say, frankly. And it always helps to know some answers too, by the way. You know? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I've been really pleased to see that the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, where you're working as well as at King's College, seem to be doing more in the area of going out and offering interviews and that sort of thing.
And we don't see it as being hostile. We just see it that they perhaps see us as slightly strange.
Yeah.
And the way you overcome a perception of strangeness is by engagement.
Yeah.
By, in effect, making sure that these views are heard, seen, and understood to be mainline. I think that's one of the things we have allowed ourselves to be slightly sidelined, so that most people don't know these ideas anymore. We need to get them back.
Yeah. I mean, one advice I could give as someone in the media as well myself is that very often, if I were a TV producer or someone like that, and I'd just put out a Channel 4 documentary on Why God is Terrible by Richard Dawkins, probably I would be more receptive to hearing from someone who emailed me and said, that was a very interesting program, but have you considered talking to Professor Alistair McGrath or John Lennox or whoever for a different perspective on this, rather than a "you're terrible and going to hell now" sort of response? Because in the end, the reason they might have been willing to produce a program like that is because they had that impression of a Christian to begin with, and they simply may be completely unaware that there are good, intellectually credible arguments for the Christian faith out there, and so we can be people who actually are pointing them in the right direction, and I'd encourage you to do that with gentleness and respect. Thank you very much, folks. Let's have another question. I did promise one from the back. I don't know if anyone actually has a question at the back, but well, if you don't worry, that's fine. Let's have one from elsewhere then in the audience. Perhaps we can get a microphone. Yep, over there. It's just passing over. If you'd stand up and give us your question. And anyone else who wants to ask a question, just keep your hand raised and we'll get the other microphone to you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for your for the program today. I have some question that I've written down quickly, and I want to ask it, but try to make sense of it.
How many questions?
It's just one question.
Great. Okay.
In the wake of what happened this couple of days in the streets of London, is it fair to say that although most Muslims are not terrorists or they're peaceful, is it fair to say that the Quran actually warrants such actions? And if so, how do I explain this without alienating my friends, my Muslim friends? Wow,
that's very obviously a topical question. I don't know if anyone's willing to talk to this here, but do you want to give us a start, Fuzz? I don't know if that's something you'd be... do you know, you heard about the event that is being referenced here?
Yeah, and of course, living in the United States, this is a very real issue as well. And, you know, it's a complex issue, and I think the ultimate goal, though, is to introduce people to the person of Jesus. And so my strategy when I engage Muslims, and I don't actually do that to a large degree, but when I have that opportunity, to me, the strategy should not be to try to demonstrate that Islam is false, first and foremost, but rather I think what you want to do is introduce a Muslim to the person of Jesus Christ. And, you know, growing up in a home where my father was a Muslim, I can tell you that many Muslims who are sincere about their faith very much are zealous towards pleasing God. A Muslim is one who surrenders. And so, you know, to me, I think what you want to do is highlight what is unique about the Christian faith. For example, while, you know, I didn't really have any kind of religious instruction growing up because of my family background, the greatest exposure I had to any religious system as a young man was to Islam because of my father. And there was a point when I was about 16 or 17 where I became very interested in learning about Islam. And I think part of what motivated me was just trying to connect with my father as a young man and to my heritage to some degree. And so I was learning to pray as a Muslim. I was reading from the Quran. And what became evident to me very quickly was how burdensome I felt that Islam was. And yet what's interesting, as a Christian, prayer is not an obligation, but rather it's an opportunity for us to communicate with the Creator of the universe. A Muslim has no security in terms of their salvation, yet we're promised security through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so there are some very key differences between the Christian faith and between Islam that I think that Muslims would find appealing. Allah is unknowable. We can know God through Jesus Christ, through the working in the communion of the Holy Spirit. And so there are very important ideas in the Christian faith that I think would be very appealing and would resonate with Muslims and their inner desires, I think, to ultimately live a life that's pleasing to God. And so that's how I would start it. I wouldn't worry about whether or not Islam is a religion of violence or not. I'm not a Muslim scholar. I can't answer that question, but I can communicate what Christianity is about and highlight where I believe there are key differences. That's how I would approach those interactions.
Thanks. That was a really, really helpful answer. Okay, I think we'll go to another question. Yes.
It seems to me ideas best progress when both sides are presenting their arguments well. And as been pointed out, often Dawkins and the New Atheists don't, not always, but often they don't. I just wonder what proponents or apologists for atheists or non-Christian ideas you've best come across.
Okay, so who's making the arguments best on the other side, as it were? Peter Williams and maybe Kurt will get some ideas from you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and there are certainly atheist philosophers, for example, who would make much more difficult reading for a Christian than someone like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens, who, after all, was a zoologist and a journalist and not trained in philosophy of religion and so on. So if you wanted just some names off the top of my head, people like Quentin Smith, for example, a philosopher who's done quite a lot of debating with Bill Craig, who was mentioned earlier. If you look up a lot of Bill Craig's debates, he debates a wide range of scholars, some of whom are certainly better than others, but you will find people like Bill Craig prepared to take on in a serious discussion much more academically trained atheists who know what they're talking about in the area of philosophy of religion, as well as this sort of media-friendly neo-atheists and so on. So actually pursuing some of Bill Craig's online resources would be a good way of getting into some of the more academically rigorous atheism that is available out there.
I don't know what you think about this, Kurt, but I sometimes come across Christians who are very happy to read the pro side of the argument, maybe a little bit more worried about picking up any of the atheist argument type books. How do you feel about our reading material?
One of the things that I'm trying to do with my ministry is to foster healthy dialogues across various worldviews. So this would include Christian and atheistic relations. And so I think one of the problems that Christians may struggle with is just running in our own little circles. And so sometimes we may create straw men about what atheists really believe or ought to believe, or even Muslims, what Muslims believe or what they ought to believe. So I think what the question the gentleman had was very good. I mean, we can tell that the new atheism appears to maybe not be they're not the best proponents of what philosophical atheism is addressing. And to add a couple other names, Fuzz just debated Michael Roos, Florida State University. Kai Nielsen is a philosopher at University of Quebec, I believe. Those would be some of the atheistic philosophers that if you really wanted to find guys who are taking their beliefs to the logical conclusions, they would be guys to look into.
Yeah, and obviously listen to Unbelievable. What can I say? Seriously though, I think there's something to be said there, what you said at the outset of your question about it's often in the dialogue that we kind of hear the sides coming together best in terms of starting to ask those questions. Yes, Alistair?
I think it's very important to have friends who are atheists. Partly because it's a way of reaching out, but partly because also, they will tell you what they really think, and you can explore arguments with them. And I think it really stops you shooting at straw men. It means you know where people really are. And also, they will tell you very quickly what they think about Dawkins. So, that helps you get a sense of perspective.
Great stuff. Do we have a microphone at our next questioner? Here we go. Thank you.
Yes, there's a question on media and apologetics. I think looking at our culture today, I find it's a highly spiritual kind of culture. We look at the movie genres, for example, paranormal, vampires, superhero, survival genres. I think in my evaluation, people are looking for some kind of transcendent experience. But often Christians would say, don't watch it because they're evil. So what advice we give the church, and what strategies do you think the church can take to use them as a tool for apologetics?
Does anyone want to pick that up? Yep.
I can give a plug for the Damaris Trust here.
Who happened to employ you?
Who happened to employ me? I should I should reveal that. Yes. Damaris do a lot of work now working with secular film companies, producing the official community resources for films that come out at the cinema. Recently, we've done material that goes along films like Life of Pi and Les Mis, Quartet, and so on. And this is resources that help facilitate group discussion about the spiritual, moral, philosophical issues brought up by contemporary film. That is specifically designed, most of this resources, for non-Christian community groups to have discussions about these kind of deep issues that are raised by films. We also produce resources specifically for use in church contexts that are a bit more theological, some resources that are useful for teaching RE in school and so on. But these, I think, resources produced by Christians but that are able to be used by non-Christians in a non-Christian context with integrity, but that just get people thinking about deep spiritual, moral and philosophical issues. Because as Nick Pollard of Damaris Trust says, if you want to get people thinking about Jesus, first of all you have to get people thinking. And film, the stories that we frame thinking and exploring these issues through film a lot in our culture. That is a major way in which our culture grapples with these kind of issues. And so I think Christians should positively engage with film and say, yes, of course there are things that we want to be cautious about, but there are also things that we want to praise and use as a tool. And take a sort of proactive and positive approach to engaging with our culture, just as St. Paul did back in Acts 17, quoting from the Greek playwrights and poets and so on to communicate the gospel in Athens.
There's a great, actually, article in the Christianity magazine you will have got in your delegate pack today on Les Miserables. I don't know if anyone's seen that. I saw it earlier in the year. And if you want a film that is just packed with the Christian gospel, that's it. It's a wonderful resource, I think, for the Christian church if we're prepared to see it for what it is. And yeah, I do encourage you to look up that article.
I think there's a lot of hypocrisy as well amongst Christians who point the finger at vampire films and so on and say that's evil. Because there is a lot in the Bible about devils, demons, sorcery, witchcraft, and so on. And the fact that something has the supernatural as a theme does not automatically make it evil. And although I think one has to be careful about not exposing yourself to danger, I can certainly think of lots of movies that have supernatural themes that can be used as a gateway. And it's very interesting that most of those who would vehemently say, for example, the Twilight series, avoid them, are quite happy about the White Witch and the Hobgoblins and
in Narnia,
so on in the Narnia stories, through which Lewis probably has introduced thousands of children to Aslan. So I think we do need to be careful that we're not giving a knee-jerk reaction over that.
Kurt, you look like you want to say something.
First of all, I wouldn't see Twilight because it's got vampires. I just, it's probably a bad plot. Not a very good story. We've had a couple questions about the media and how to interact. A couple of my thoughts are, I think something I've noticed from engaging with non-Christians is so when you go to watch a movie, you want to be entertained. You don't want to feel like you're being preached at. And so I think some Christians are learning the hard way from that. We've created movies for Christian circles that, we might understand and get, but non-Christians feel like, it's not very entertaining for them. So the first thing I would say is just make good movies, make them entertaining, get people to think about things in a deep way without preaching at them. I think that's important. I think Bono probably sells more music than Kirk Cameron does at making movies in that way.
Yeah, and I'd echo all that and say that if we are going to see Christian apologetics reach the culture, it's not just going to be through conferences, debates, radio shows, as good as those things are. It's got to be when people go and start writing books that are just good books, like Lewis did, but where he wasn't kind of preaching an overt Christian gospel necessarily. Equally, the film is probably the equivalent of what the book was in Lewis's day in terms of the way it reaches our culture today. So we need people who are transmitting those ideas in new and imaginative ways in film, don't we? Thank you very much. Let's go to another question. Perhaps, have we got someone already at the microphone? Yeah, excellent. Go ahead.
Hi there. Hello. I'm a university student, and in our Christian Union we'll do an events week where we've got lunch bars and evening talks, a lot on hot topics and the apologetic side of things. But there's a great apathy among students especially, and you were touching on it there with the films. That sounds really exciting to get people engaged, but for especially students or those who are really with the vast apathy, how can we engage them in wanting to ask and discuss the answers to those big questions?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Alistair, I wonder if you could start us off on that as someone still involved in the university scene.
I think one thing you could think of doing is realise that very often people like a dialogue or debate, because it helps them to frame questions, and also it's more interesting than simply hear someone talk about something. So you might think of setting up a rather tendentious debate, with perhaps something to do with new atheism, something like that, and it does draw people in, and if you have a good speaker, they will be able to make some points that register. So I think you need to think about that. And another thing I would say is that that there is an awful lot of apathy around, full stop. I mean, that's just the way, unfortunately, it is. And I think that one of the things I very often notice happening in Christian college circles is that because Christians very often don't engage all that much anyway, there's a sort of panic. Let me suddenly make some friends so I can invite them to Christian meetings. And I think that there's a lot to be said for actually just encouraging Christians to be salt and light by really getting engaged with the university community, not simply for a mission week, but actually as a regular pattern of being a link between the Christian faith and people through them.
Does anyone else want to give any?
I think engaging with people is the key, really, and as Alistair was indicating, the events and the success of them is really contingent on that. It's a long time since I was at university, but the first friend that I remember coming to Christ was a Muslim, and this was before I knew how, theoretically, how difficult it is for Muslims to convert. And the story, in short, was that there was an exhibition on at the Royal Academy. He asked me if I wanted to go. We went from uni through Soho on the way to the exhibition, and he said to me, "Does Christianity have a view on prostitution?" And from that conversation on what the book of Proverbs has to say about prostitution, the next week he came to All Souls Langham Place with me, which is where I was worshipping at that time, to a guest service. The gospel was preached. And you could have knocked me down with a feather when my friend responded to the preacher's invitation to come and speak. And he was converted and subsequently baptized at All Souls. And it was God's time for him. And actually, I didn't have to do very much except engage at a level. And as Alistair was saying, knowing what the Bible has to say about some perhaps not obviously evangelistic topics may occasionally be helpful as well.
Thanks. We're probably only going to have time for one more, I'm afraid, before we have to start wrapping things up. We've got someone at the microphone there.
I'd like to say thank you for the day. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
My daughters as well. My question is that the Lord Jesus established Paul as his personal apostle to the Gentiles. And yet, generally speaking, we ignore this fact in our communities. Does the panel feel that we are perhaps suppressing the work of the Holy Spirit in this regard?
So just to sort of get the sense of that question, is it that you're wondering whether we need more openness to the Holy Spirit in the way we witness to people, or is it this
given by Jesus to the Apostle Paul?
A specific ministry, as it were. Right. Okay, yeah. So getting specific in the people we're called to reach in that sense. I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that one at any level.
It's that can be a tough theological issue. I've got a little bit of an interest in that, the role of the Spirit. Comparing it to Paul, I might say, could be difficult. at least from what I read of the scriptures, Paul had this really supernatural experience where the Lord even spoke to him. Now, Paul's companions didn't hear the voice. I haven't had a Damascus Road experience like that. So, at least for myself, I haven't been called in that same way as Paul has. However, in my reading of the teachings of the Scripture, both Old and New Testament, I would say Christians still have a duty to explain their faith, for us to understand what we believe for starters, but then to go out to the nations and to be the salt and light.
Absolutely, yeah. Fuzz, I don't know if you want to add anything to that in terms of specific calling.
In a sense, I think that that we all are, as Paul would write, we're part of a body, and each of us have different giftings and different orientations and different interests. And I think those are ways that God has prepared us to reach out to particular people groups. Interestingly, my father was a Muslim, but I was trained as a scientist. Well, where my real burden is not with Muslims, interestingly enough, but it's with the scientific community. And so God has made me in such a way that that's what I'm interested in. I love to learn about the latest discoveries in science. I love to communicate those ideas. I love to engage other scientists. And so, in a sense, I would say that God has called me and prepared me for that, and that's where I feel drawn. And so it would be wrong of me to try to, just because of my background, to try to reach out to Muslims and that become and feeling compelled that that's my focus, because I don't think that God has prepared me that way. But yet I know people who have no background in Islam who have a tremendous burden to reach out to Muslim people. And so I feel like that we are many times responding to what the Holy Spirit has called us to do. But we just have to look at how we are trained, how we are equipped, what our interests are, and that's where I think God is going to lead us naturally, and those are going to be the people we're going to engage with.
Let's have the last word to Alistair, and then we'll draw things.
Well, I've always been very impressed and deeply moved by the calling of the first disciples by the Sea of Galilee, where they're fishermen, they have their nets, and Jesus just says, follow me, I will make you fishers of men. I've often thought about those words because what Jesus seems to be saying is, look, your past history prepares you for what's going to happen next. And I think everybody in this room today has got resources in their history which can be put to God's service. And I think part of our job is to work out what we bring to the table and see how we can use that apologetically.
Yeah, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our panel.